In a letter sent to the FBI Director, Christopher Wray, Comer writes this: the committee is concerned because it makes Walz susceptible to the party's strategy of elite capture, which seeks to co-opt influential figures in elite political, cultural, and academic circles to influence the United States to the benefit of the communist regime and the detriment of Americans. Joining me now is the president of the Government Accountability Office, Peter Schweizer, who has studied China and its influence campaigns extensively. Peter is the author of the best-selling books Blood Money, Red-Handed, and Profiles in Corruption. Peter, good to see you. Your reaction to what we've heard from Tim Walz: he's praised Chinese communism as a system where everyone is the same and everyone shares. Do you believe that the Communist Party has been grooming Tim Walz?
Oh, I think there's no question about it, Maria. It goes back to the exchange program that he ran and brought hundreds of students from the United States to China. In the early press accounts, Tim Walz describes it as unique and unusual and different, a program that nobody else has. And at the same time that he's bringing those students there, by the students' accounting, Tim Walz is saying things like, well, in China, nobody is poor because everybody shares in China, as if sort of the compulsive arm of the CCP is voluntary. I mean, sharing is voluntary. It's a ridiculous statement to make. There are other comments he made. He told students going to China to downplay their Americanness. There's an account from one student, I haven't been able to independently verify it, saying that he brought back lots of copies of Mao's Little Red Book when he was in China. So this is a relationship that's long-standing, and it carried forward when he joined Congress and the actions that he was taking in Congress as well.
This is very concerning. You also have notes on a meeting that he had with Premier Li in 2016.
Yeah, this is very interesting. He goes to China in 2016 with a few other Democrats. He recounts how he's meeting with Chinese officials, and he says, oh, I was here in China in December of 1989. And they said, no, it was February of 1990. I mean, in other words, they had been tracking him when he was a young man. But in that meeting with Premier Li, it's a classic example of elite capture and what the Chinese call big help with a little bad mouth. Tim Walz has talked about the human rights condition in China, but it's never in the context of doing anything about it. And during this meeting with Premier Li, he told Premier Li, well, don't look to the United States as an example of how to do this because we don't know how to do it right either. Those are his descriptions of what he told Premier Li. So it's this massive moral equivalence, which is exactly what China wants from elites in the United States. Talk about human rights, but don't do anything about it, and also create this moral equivalence that the Chinese system's not any worse than ours. That is exactly what Tim Walz has done over the years.
Well, and also we've seen on Chinese state media, all of this adoring commentary from Chinese leaders on TikTok about Tim Walz. So they're clearly doing their own propaganda to try to get this guy into the White House as vice president. How do you expect that to play out should they actually win in terms of China policy?
Well, I think Tim Walz would become the liaison with the Chinese, and this is enormously troubling. It's a little different than the Bidens, where the Bidens were getting paid. I think with Tim Walz, it's much more of, he's a fellow traveler. He likes the Chinese government. He's praised them and said what wonderful things they do. In 2019, when he was governor of Minnesota, he actually was the headline speaker at a speech for a United Front group. And what's unusual, Maria, is that there was not a single other government official at any other level that spoke at that event. He was the only one. He was legitimizing an entity that every administration, including the Biden administration, says part of an influence operation by the CCP and linked to Chinese intelligence. And there he was giving the headline speech.
Well, I'd like to know if the FBI has been tracking all of this. We've heard from Christopher Wray many times that the CCP is one of the most important and biggest threats this country faces. Let's take a short break, and then I want to get your take on what the current government, CIA and FBI, would know about all of this in terms of Tim Walz's travels to China. Stay with us. We've got Peter Schweizer this morning. We'll be right back with more. Welcome back. I'm talking with Peter Schweizer, president of the Government Accountability Office. And Peter, we just mentioned Tim Walz's commentary about communist China. Here's one of the quotes about everyone being the same. He says, he told students this: "It means that everyone is the same and everyone shares. The doctor and the construction worker make the same." Okay, the Chinese government and the place they work for provide housing and about 30 pounds of rice per month. They get food and they get housing. Everyone is the same. Peter, you've got the vice president nominee saying everyone's the same in China and it's a good system. You've got Kamala Harris saying price gouging is taking place, and that's the reason that inflation is spiking. So she wants to tell us what the price of bread and butter should be. What does this tell you about this ticket?
It tells you a lot of things that are very troubling, Maria. Let's also remember the situation with COVID. Tim Walz, as governor, never called out China for their involvement in fentanyl, never with their involvement with COVID, and yet in Minneapolis, he basically imitated the CCP model for how to deal with this virus. So it's very disconcerting, a lack of faith in sort of American values, American traditions. And look, this gentleman has got to have been on the radar of U.S. intelligence services for a while. They're very cognizant of Chinese efforts to cultivate relationships, subnational relationships with people like governors. And let's remember, Tim Walz, when he was in Congress, a sitting member of Congress, became a visiting fellow at the Macau Polytechnic Institute in China, which describes itself as earmarked by its devotion to the motherland. A sitting member of Congress was doing this, so I'm sure there is quite a bit. I would also like to know, by the way, that when he was doing these trips to China, these exchange programs, he was actually in the National Guard. Did he get approval to travel to a hostile country while a member of the U.S. military? That would seem to me to be a requirement in that position. Did he actually do that when he was taking those trips?
Yeah, which is why James Comer is investigating this. He wants to know what the FBI and the CIA know about this, because just from what you just said, being in the National Guard, you would think that they would be tracking that.
They should be. And look, I think Jim Comer did a great job when it came to the Hunter Biden investigation in gathering the evidence.
Right.
Unfortunately, I don't think Congress is going to move on impeachment, but he's done a terrific job, and he'll do a great job here as well.
All right. Well, they just had a fifth meeting of the financial working group between the U.S. and the People's Republic of China. We keep sending more people back and forth to China, and we don't really see any change in this soft approach. Peter, great to have you. Thanks very much for being here. Peter Schweizer joining us. That'll do it for us this morning on Sunday Morning Futures. Thank you so much for joining us.